Does this sound okay? Okay. Well, welcome to our session on CBD spent waste material and what to do with it, if anything. So I'm going to start out with Titan Hemp, because without Titan Hemp, Titan Bioplastics would not exist today. And Titan Hemp is comprised of myself and my partner, Tanya Hart. And we got together back in 2016, and we've been building out seed to sale, from seed to sale solutions for the hemp industry. What does that look like? We're aggregating, we're authenticating, we're building, and we're creating. What we are doing is putting together a program with merit and meaning for farmer support all the way to advanced material buyers. Everyone in between has to have a place, and their valuable contributions mean something. So if we build a valuable supply chain, then a lot of this hemp innovation that we're talking about can exist. And Leonard Salgado, if you can see him right here, he's our frontline partnership in New Mexico, and he's an amazing farmer, and he's a part of the legislation that's going in New Mexico, and so he's a great example of how we're building out Titan Hemp with our partners. So New Mexico, Leonard is our go-to partner for the farmers in New Mexico. We're very excited about that relationship. So fast forward and say, in order to talk about what we're going to talk about today, or to understand if there's any value with CBD spent waste material, we need to understand the strengths and the attributes of the spent waste, and then also understand the technology behind how to repurpose the spent waste. So it's very critical for us to understand the supply chain, and that's what Titan Hemp is building out. And what we're going to talk about today is really the spent waste materials and what you can do with it, not necessarily the value chain in getting there. So that's for another talk. So Titan Bioplastics. We came together in October of 2017, and it was, again, Titan Hemp was in the industry. We had a lot of hemp, all right? We were looking at Thailand, and 4,000 farmers under one program. It was really amazing. We thought we just literally solved the world's problem. We thought the sustainable supply was the only issue that we were dealing with. And when we brought this concept of a sustainable supply from Thailand to the Fortune 50, some of these companies were giving us the indication that they didn't even know what to do with hemp, and we thought that they would. And so there's a lot of education that has to happen in order for us to do anything with hemp innovation. So Titan Hemp, we went out and tried to figure out who out there in the industry knows what to do with hemp and transforming it into a valuable commodity. And what we found was, from a divine appointment, in my opinion, was a science team with David that represents the top 1% in plant-based nanotechnology, thermoplastics, biodegradation. His team is so amazing. They can pivot into any marketplace and formulate for all different types of applications. Our master batch formulations are ready today. These are not something we're under research. Our bioplastic formulations are compostable, biodegradable. You can shred them up. You can feed them to livestock. It's nutritious. We call this table to farm. It's really exciting. 100% plant-based bioplastics. And one of the things that we're ushering in this year is because of the cannabis industry. The cannabis industry is so exciting because they are the progressive. We are the sustainable ones. And so we were hired to create a bioplastic package for the industry, and we are going to be releasing that very soon with our clients. So just know, you're one of the first to know that we are excited to be licensing this out into the industry. So that's coming soon. Winning others over. I just wanted to point out that I did a TED Talk last November, and so if you guys have skeptical friends and coworkers and families, share my TED Talk with them. It's all about Hemp 101 and paper, plastic, all the different things that we know that can be done with hemp, right, and what we're doing. Also, conversation with David Abacussis, Ending the Plastic Pollutions with Bioplastics. That's a great podcast that we posted on YouTube. And you can understand a lot more about plant-based nanotechnology on that. It's a long one, but it's very, very informative. And then also, I just want to highlight that we're going to be speaking at the Hemp Canna FarmCon in San Diego this August. So we'll be talking to the farmers there about what we're up to as two Titans. So the Market Watch, I just want to pull this out because this is really important for you guys to just get your arms around what we're doing. And I really want to highlight not necessarily where we're at with the bioplastics and biopolymer market. Right now it's hovering around 7, and then it's going to grow to 15. Very interesting. I mean, we're not even a part of this equation. We're focused on the top 10 plastics at $586 billion by 2021. This is by Markets and Markets. And I love their reporting. If you look at what is going on here, the biggest thing in this top 10 is packaging. Out of all of these is packaging. And that is our target, is to really be transforming the marketplace through packaging. And that's a lot of plant-based material to be replacing that number. So just think about what we are up to as a global village, trying to create sustainable economies that are local to countries and states. I mean, this is just getting going, and we're at the forefront. All of us are, and I thank you for whatever you're doing in the industry. Thank you so much. There's not enough of us out there, and it's really about education, and a rising tide floats all boats. So we're here to share and to collaborate, and we're ready to collaborate. Like I said, our bioplastic formulations are not out of the box. We need a client that says, I want to transform this. Well, this is a recipe. So you give us that recipe and we'll compare contrast. We're ready to do it, but it takes a willing client that wants to transform. So I want to get right into this because it's very interesting that David does most of the talking. I absolutely am privileged and honored to be working with David Abacussis, and I'm just going to turn this over to our science officer to talk about spent waste material, and at the end you can have questions for David. So thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you. So before we want to get into the spent flower material, I just want to spend 1 minute talking about a case study. So in 1850, Germany was entirely made of small little farming villages and was an agricultural society. Somewhere between the 1850s and the 1870s, a German chemist figured out that you could get paid to take all the coal tar from England. You got paid to haul it off. And he found a way to convert it into dyestuffs that you could then sell back to the English for their textile industry. And so by the 1870s, from that one technology that used spent waste from another economy, Germany became the most powerful banking system in Europe within 30 years from that innovation, which led to their entire chemical industry. So I want to give that as an example. So as we, at Titan Bioplastics, we look typically for materials, engineered materials. We do everything from graphene to biodegradable plastics. Here, though, we had a unique situation, which is what do you do with all this flower biomass? And so the first thing you want to do is analyze its strengths. What are its strengths? Well, when I went through it, compared to other plant material, the one thing that the flower biomass has an advantage is it's got a higher content of phosphate, and that's because it's got its reproductive organs. That's the reason you use phosphate for bloom. You're producing a lot of DNA, and DNA is very important to reproduction. So the flowering material is higher in phosphate than normal in other parts of the plant. So how do we use this as an advantage? So if you look at the different types of phosphate that are available as nutrients for your plant cultivation, you have different kinds, and they typically range from mineral to things like bat guano from fruiting. Again, trying to look for a high phosphate ratio, but also looking at solubility. So solubility is very important. The plant's going to need enough phosphate, but everything that you give the plant above what it needs is going to leach into the groundwater, And it turns out that phosphates are highly polluting to fresh water, very highly polluting. And that's why they banned phosphorus-containing detergents years back, is because they contaminate fresh water, they call algal blooms. And then you've got other forms of phosphate, like certain types of mineral phosphate, where you drop it in, it's so insoluble in water that it's going to be released so slowly, you might have too low dosages to be effective. And plants can vary a lot in their nutrient requirements. But hemp and cannabis require pretty high amounts of phosphate. And again, if you're using the spent flower material from hemp, which is cannabis, then you've actually got a ratio of phosphate that's organic and soluble that's pretty close to what the next generation is going to need. And so that makes it a very well-tailored composting amendment, and also just as a micronized organic amendment. So one of the other things that's very important is, one of the byproducts is that phosphates tend to form complexes with metals. The phosphate ion has a negative charge, metals have positive charges, and they kind of glue together using a magnetic process we call ionic interaction, ionic bonding. And so what happens is, in states, especially states that are regulated by the health department, and nations like Canada, there's a lot of concern about trace metals ending up in extract, whether it's your CBD oil or your cannabis oil. Because you're concentrating something that's soluble to metals, there's a fear that you'll be concentrating the metals. And if you can remember Gulf War syndrome, if any of you are familiar with that, that was not caused by uranium rounds. That was caused by an anthrax vaccine with aluminum oxide that they were giving soldiers to protect them. And they found that above 50 milligrams over a 10-year period of time, you get all kinds of neuropathy, multiple sclerosis goes through the roof, all kinds of neurodegenerative disorders that were caused by trace metals. And that's the same concern the cannabis industry has in regulating metals. So one of the advantages of using this spent flower waste is that because it's high in phosphate, it's going to arrest these metals. It's going to complex them, and if you use it as part of your overall nutrient and amendment regime, you're going to slow the metal uptake by the cannabis plants, especially, and for the hemp plants as well, which helps your extract pass testing requirements from different states. So the other thing you can do with this flower, you can particle size it. So I was given a sample of this flower material to take home on an airplane from a meeting to see what I could do with it. But it just looked like the bag of pot you had when you were in high school, which, I didn't want to take through. TSA is pretty cool about a lot of stuff, but that was just kind of, in your face. So, so I looked at what can you do with this material. Well, one of the things you can do, regardless of what you're going to do with it, is you can reduce and the size of the particles. You've got flowers, you can beat it down into a powder, separate it from the stem material or include it with the stem material using screening, and you can also use hammer milling, which is very effective at reducing particle sizes in hemp and cannabis. And so you get different types of particle sizes that you can segregate into different piles or containers. And then you can use them for some very interesting applications, which are value added when you have a hemp cultivation, especially when it's outdoors. One is you can use this high phosphate, it's not high in nitrogen, but high phosphate material for emergency fuel spill remediation. It turns out if you've got micronized flour in a pretty fine powder, and millimeter to micron size, that you can actually use this as an adsorbent, but because of the phosphate content and because of the nitrogen content, you actually feed the microbes that will break down hydrocarbons. So you can actually use this to arrest a spill. Let's say you're using a tractor and you have a fuel spill, a tank falls off the back, and 5-gallon spills on your land. Okay, first of all, you've got an issue of pollution, which is going to contaminate your land. You can use the pails that you've prepared of micronized hemp or cannabis flower that's been extracted, and you can actually arrest the spill from going to the groundwater. It will encapsulate on the material, and then if you bring it up to the surface and spread it out, you'll actually break down the fuel into just topsoil, and it'll depollute the site. The second thing you can do with this fiber material, like, why do I want to go to the trouble of micronizing my stuff? I could just, compost it in a heap and Well, the other thing is you can do odor control, and for different types of things. So if you have if you have a compost pile that generates odors, or if you have different types of materials that you can sprinkle with the hemp fines, you can actually stop the odor from being emitted. So, and that can be useful in circumstances where the neighbors are complaining or you've got a compost pile. You can actually take this finely micronized material, spread it over the top. It's not going to arrest it, but it will block the VOCs or smells coming off of it. So that's another value-added use. Now we get to the stalks and stems. I've talked mainly about the flowers, but then we can do some things with the stalks and stems that are also very useful, especially if I'm doing outdoor cultivation. First is, I can take the stalks and stems and reduce them, again, using hammer milling or some sort of a chipping process. I can use them as mulch to retain moisture. Now, that can be important for the certain types of soils. It doesn't even have to be cannabis cultivation. You could, give the mulch off to tomato farms or whatever. Helps retain soil moisture. It also increases soil organic matter and in outdoor cultivation. Now, that's extremely important in areas that are sandy and areas that are fairly arid. In arid areas, some micro moisture is retained. You can actually cultivate effectively, reduce the evaporation rate, and then the organic matter obviously it makes a healthier soil, healthier living soil, and you can enrich that. You can use it, therefore, for soil remediation, same way you could use the leaf matter, again, to encapsulate and bond hydrocarbons. Again, you can use it for odor absorption and oil remediation as well. And oil remediation is what I did most of my graduate work in at Rutgers, so I'm familiar with the topic. It's a very useful. So I want to also talk about different terms that are emerging in the industries. Okay, I hear a lot of bioplastics, and sometimes that means different things to different people. So a lot of what we term bioplastics, where there's a fiber or hemp fiber or something that's been encapsulated in polypropylene, that's really called biofiller plastics. That's the correct term, because they're not really bioplastics. They have a biological filler, but they're really just ordinary plastics. Then there are bioplastics, which are derived from biological sources. There is actually a form of polyethylene that is made from a biological source. It's not biodegradable, but it's a bioplastic, because the raw material for it, instead of being petroleum or ethylene gas, it's actually going to be made from corn waste. But it turns out to be the same polyethylene you would get from petroleum. Then there's biodegradable plastics, and that's what we do a lot of. And these are plastics that actually compost or biodegrade back into topsoil and bacteria and humic matter the same way food would. Now, there's some other things that are very important to understand about micronized hemp fiber and cannabis fiber. One is the fiber length. So fiber length is the size of the particle you're going to get, and that's going to determine what you're going to do with it. So whether you're doing hempcrete in one case, plastic filler in another, or making a thermoset composite in a third case, the fiber length is going to be chosen based on what you're doing with it. And so that's a very important thing to consider when you're processing the fibers down. The other thing is, if you're doing hemp fibers that are longer than a certain size, they're not just filler, but you're actually using them for fibers, you want to look at tensile strength. And tensile strength is when you pull two ends of a fiber, how much force does it take to break it? And again, this can be a reflection of the nutritional conditions, how you're cultivating, but it reflects on the crystallinity of the cellulose. And it turns out that hemp and cannabis have some of the highest tensile strength of any natural cellulose fiber in nature. The other thing you want to consider is thermal stability. All organic compounds break down after a certain temperature. See your toast, in the morning. And so you can start to brown and sort of crisp cellulose at around 350 C or below. And so when you're putting cellulose or putting hemp fibers or cannabis fibers into plastics or into polymers, you have to really consider what temperature is this going to see. Above a temperature X, which most plastics process at, you're going to get scorching of the fibers. So that's to be considered. And then also finally, you got to look at the moisture content. Most hemp is dried. A lot of cannabis throwaway is not, but moisture content has a lot to do with how you can use it. And I'll give you an example. let's say you were going to drop hemp fibers into nylon. Nylon's a common engineering plastic. Well, nylon has to be kept ultra dry when you process it. So you'd have to get your moisture content of your fibers down to below a certain threshold to be able to use it in nylon. So moisture content's extremely important. If you're going to be using it for bioremediation, you actually might want a higher moisture content. So these are things to consider when you're looking at your fiber. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about graphene. Some of you know what graphene is, some of you don't. The picture up here on the corner is actually of a Buckminster fullerene, and those are a type of, in the family of carbon nanotubes that are found in outer space. You can also make them here on planet Earth. But what we're going to be looking at, and at Titan Bioplastics, we're spending a lot of time in energy collaborating with third parties, is taking the cellulose, which is highly crystalline, converting it to a compound called graphene oxide, and then making different kinds of graphene derivatives from it. And one of the interesting things about graphene is when I got to graduate school in 1994 from Rutgers, the most conductive material known to man at that time was silver. And it wasn't very strong, but as far as conducting electricity, nothing could match silver. Since then, through the advent of nanoscience, and in particular the study of carbon nanotubes, graphene is at the molecular level a superconductor at room temperature, and it happens to be the strongest material known to man when the graphene molecules are lined up in the form of fibers and other materials. So you could literally take an elephant and balance it on a pencil on a graphene sheet. Now the really difficult part of this technology is getting the elephant to balance on the pencil. So I just wanted to address any questions that anyone had about spent waste material and potential value-added uses and what I just went over. If any, okay. You, sir.
You didn't mention it, so I'm going to assume I already know the answer, but you mentioned the fine materials that you could use to remediate fuel from soil. Would that also work in water, say?
Okay, so in water, what you have to have for water is there's a different particle size. The water material is going to need to float. A lot of times it'll need to entrain air and have capillary action that'll pull the fuel into it. So it's going to have probably a longer fiber content than something you would use in soil. For that reason, you want it floating, pulling the fuel off the surface, and you want to be able to skim it back off. To do that, it's got to have entrained air, and it's got to have enough entrained air or enough surface, let's say buoyancy, that it's going to rise up. If you have small particles, they're more likely to wet, so something that will act really well in soil would not perform as well in water. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? In the back there. Go ahead. No, let her, the woman here with the black sweater. Yes, go ahead.
I know you mentioned about hemp, obviously there's no legal considerations in remediating the hemp product, but is there any legal, I guess, protocols in terms of remediating MJ products?
I'm sorry, as far as remediating using MJ products, so the thing is, this is based on the idea that you've extracted everything. So what you've got left over right now is something with really no violation of THC content or very little. And so the fiber, once you micronize it, none of the interior stuff in the plant's going to have any THC. The THC is kept on trichomes, and on certain types of cannabis plants, you'll have some trichomes on the stem, but that's rare. So if you've got decorticated hemp fibers or cannabis fibers and using the interior portion minus the skin, it's really never an issue.